Hello. I wanted to make a quick list of beneficial things that tend to fly under the radar for many people even after this game has been out for almost 20 years. If you are a veteran player, some of these things might be completely obvious to you. Other points you might not agree with me on. So keep in mind that this list is just based on my personal experiences from interacting with people from the community, and it's heavily molded by my own personal playstyle. Now that I have stated the obvious, let's get into it. Or should I say, let's jump in. Number 10. The Lionheart body armor. This armor often gets ignored when people are discussing budget options for their own characters or their mercenaries, and I'm not sure why. If you look at the stats, it's really a wonderful armor for completing your playthrough and even going a little bit further than that perhaps. The highest rune in it is a Fall rune, and if you really want a Fall rune you can usually get one. For me, Lionheart is also the armor of choice when it comes to setting up a budget smiter. Number 9. The Rabid Crew. Not only is this character one of the most hilarious cow running characters ever, but it's also a really solid melee character in its own right. I think people make the incorrect assumptions that this is just about the poison damage, but that's really not the case. Poison damage is the gravy that you get on top of the already very decent Fury Druid build that otherwise completely lacks any kind of AoE. You ever notice that minus enemy poison resistance mod on Grief? Well, this character will actually put it to good use. Number 8. Mana after each kill. The only reason this isn't higher up on the list is because large part of the community has already figured out that this stat is in fact very helpful. The number of mana recovered might usually look a little underwhelming, especially to people who are used to the ridiculously bloated numbers of some of the modern ARPGs. But once you start to think about things, you realize that the mana pools of even endgame characters are usually relatively small, while the number of enemies killed is often very high. Very useful mod all throughout the game for anyone who wants the luxury of not having to drink as many potions. Continuing on with the theme of quality of life affixes, we have damage taken goes to mana as number 7. A lot of people already know about mana per kill, but I feel like the vast majority of players still shit on this one. Some people have this misconception that you will actually lose mana with this mod, and that is not the case. Neither will it reduce the amount of damage you are actually taking. The way it works is simply that if you have 20% damage taken goes to mana and you take 200 damage from an enemy, you will gain back 40 mana. Once again, keeping in mind the usual size of mana pools in this game, this is nothing to sneeze at, and it's a pretty helpful mod, especially on budget melee characters that might not have access to best rare rings out there. Number 6. The Slows Target mod. If you are big into Bale running, chances are that you already know how helpful this mod can be. For many people, this mod is desirable because stacking enough of it will stop Bale from casting spells. But even outside of Bale running, it's a neat mod to have, and it can make some of the tougher boss fights, like Ubers for example, completely trivial. Once applied, it lasts for a long time, so you can even do stuff like putting a slowing weapon on your switch and having the actual damage dealing weapons separate from that. Number 5. The Ice Boazon. This is one of my favorite builds in the game, and I have a pretty detailed video about it on my channel if you wanna check that out. The reason I put it on this list is because it still seems to have this misconception attached to it, that it's solely an expensive late game character that you have to burn a whole bunch of high runes on, and then you can't even go anywhere outside of ancient tunnels with it. And that is simply not true. You can build this character on a very tight budget, and it's actually completely viable for a playthrough of the game as well. Number 4. Poison resistance and poison length reduced. I'm absolutely sick of people treating poison resistance on items like it's an irrelevant modifier. I often hear arguments like, you can go to town to get the poison removed from you, or you can just drink potions to negate it. Like, that's fair, but wouldn't you much rather not do that? Wouldn't you rather spend your time progressing and killing enemies instead of constantly picking up healing potions and running back and forth between the vendors and the dungeons? Now, I agree, it's not as important as the other 3 resistances, but for God's sake, if you play a spellcaster without any kind of leech, it can be so nice to have some poison resistance. Number 3. Crescent Moon. Not only is this one of the best weapons to put on a lightning sorceress, thanks to that deceptively powerful minus enemy light res mod, but it's also a solid little melee weapon in its own right, and it basically only costs an rune to make. Static field proc is wonderful for boosting the AoE capabilities of a budget Kixin or a Holy Sock Sealer, for example. Considering you can also make it into a polearm, that makes it one of the most useful budget merc weapons available, especially if you are playing without ladder-only rune words like Insight or Obedience. Don't throw away your 3 open socket at polearms, people. Give Crescent Moon a chance. Number 2. The Kixin. Now, anyone who has talked to me about this game in any amount of detail knows that I have a big hard-on for this character. When you consider the fact that Blizzard probably never intended Dragon Talon to be spammed like this, I think the Kixin is a happy little accident. It's an interesting mishmash of mechanics, and being a melee class that is not reliant on weapon damage means that some very interesting gear options become top tier for her. There are many ways you can build the character, and not only is it absolutely viable build, but I believe it's legit one of the strongest characters in the game. People are not playing this build enough. As the number 1, we have the most undeservedly taboo thing in Diablo 2, and that is putting points into energy. Thanks to how the hit recovery mechanic in this game works, having a decent pool of life is fairly important, and over the years Max Vida has become sort of the default approach to building your character for most players. But ask yourself, is it really necessary for a ranged character to have over 4000 life? I feel like most of the time the answer is no. I see people dumping all of their extra stat points into vitality, even in classes like the Sorceress and the Necromancer that have a poor life per Vita gain and a very good mana per energy gain. No questions asked, max Vita all the way. But next time, before you tunnel vision towards that max Vita build, think about what some extra points into energy would do for you instead. The thing is, energy increases your mana, and the amount of mana regeneration you have is based on the size of your mana pool. The more mana you have, the faster you will regenerate. That's how simple it is. Your chances of gaining increased mana from potions also increases with higher energy. I often find myself putting like 100 points into energy on many of my characters, and that has made builds like the Blizzard Sorceress, Trapsin and Wind Druid way more enjoyable for me. Then there are the niche examples like the Singer Barb and the Ice Maiden that go from almost unplayable to absolutely valid with some points invested into energy. And that concludes my little list of things. I would appreciate some comments about stuff that you guys feel are underrated in this old classic. Or if you think my list was completely off, feel free to bark your insults at me. That's about it for today. Sictoid out.